This with me for a moment, that if just believing something made a difference, what a difference that would be. For example, if just believing in the science behind diet and exercise gave you all the benefits of diet and exercise, that'd be great. If just believing in good financial principles made you better off financially, that'd be something. How much better off we would be if just believing something made all the difference? And that's what I want you to think about this morning. What about, let's do one for students. Students would like this one. What if just studying, if just believing that you ought to study, although you didn't study, but just believing you should study, gave you a 4.0? Wouldn't that be great? So if just believing something made a difference, what a difference that would make. And the problem is not that we don't know what we should do or we don't believe what we should do. You believe in the benefit of exercise. You believe in fitness. You believe in cardio. But the reason that you're going to put that exercise machine that you bought into the garage sale next month is not because you stopped believing in those things. It's going to be because you just didn't do it. Because as far as exercise is concerned, just believing it makes no difference whatsoever. We know we should spend less than we make. We know we should study. Spiritually speaking, we know that we should forgive and give and show kindness and patience to other people. We know that. But just believing in that really does not make a difference, does it? Here's what I want you to understand. Most fail. When I'm talking about most fail, I'm talking about most Christians will fail in the Christian life. So most Christians will fail in the Christian life not because they don't know the right things or believe the right things, but because they don't do the right things. Yeah, so you are awake this morning. See, I would bet my next month's salary that a church that's going through conflict, that both sides of that conflict, they know the Bible very well. The reason that they're going through conflict is not because part of them don't know the Bible. They know the Bible. The reason they're going through conflict is they're just not applying it. Somewhere along the line, we have dumbed down Christianity into just believing things. And you know why we've done that? Because it's so much easier. No change is required. All I have to do is believe something. But when Jesus was teaching, Jesus didn't talk about the things we need to believe. He talked about it differently. He talked about the things we should do. He said, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and believes them? No, that's not what he said. Anybody who hears these words of mine and agrees with them? Anybody who hears these words of mine and writes them down? Anybody who hears these words of mine and remembers them? This is it right here. Y'all ready? Anybody who hears these words of mine and is convicted by them. Yeah. You ever been hurt by something the preacher said? Or the way we put it today, he stepped on my toes? Boy, he sure stepped on my toes today. Don't plan on doing anything about it, but boy, he sure stepped on my toes today. See, for us in our Christian culture, that is a spiritual experience. We think that we've had something going on between me and God when we get convicted. Let me give you some, I guess I'll go ahead and do this. I'll let out a little secret. It's pastor speak, okay? Pastors, we call that Christian mooing. When you hear something, you get convicted and you go, So we'll sit around, how was your sermon? Yes, had a lot of mooing going on. Planning on doing anything about it? No. But we'll come back next week because we want some more of that. We think it's a spiritual experience whenever that happens. But here's what Jesus actually said in Matthew 7:24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. from this perspective, a wise man is somebody who knows what they do today will make a difference in their life tomorrow. And it's like building their house on a rock. Because building a house on a rock, that took effort. That was hard. It took intentionality. That was difficult to do that. In the next verse, he says, then the rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house, yet did not collapse because its foundation was on a rock. See, they knew in that time what it was like to have a flash flood come through and just wipe everything out. They knew what it was like to have just some heavy, straight winds come through in a big storm, and all of a sudden it just collapses and everything's gone, and you might not even survive. They knew what that was like for that to take place. But then he says, but everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act upon them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. So what's a foolish man? Somebody who hears and believes, but they don't do anything with it. See, what you need to understand, what we need to understand, what I need to understand is that it is possible to hear the word of God, to believe it, but still live a life that completely undermines your faith. Here's what we need to grab a hold of. If you believe all the right things but don't do what you believe, you're setting yourself up for a crisis of faith. That means you will have a very weak faith, a very feeble faith. Because when the storm comes, what's going to happen? A couple things happen with somebody who has that weak, feeble faith. They will blame God, or they just might turn their back on God and walk away. Why? Because they never had a faith that led them to actually do what Jesus told them to do. Not just believe it, but to put it into practice. And then we read in verse 27, the rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed, and it's collapsed with a great crash. That first part of verse 27 is identical to the first part of verse 25. And what Jesus is simply saying there is that people who build a house on a rock or build it on the sand, they go through the same trials, the same storms. They'll go through loneliness storms or relational storms or financial storms. And some of you, this past 12 months, you've gone through some storms. Some of you, this past 12 months, you've gone through some crashes. You've had some relational crashes. You've had some marriage crashes. You've had some parenting crashes. The reason you're here is because you don't want to go through another crash. But here's the thing we have to understand is that nobody builds a house expecting it to crash. Nobody does that. Nobody purposely makes the foundation of their life anger. Nobody purposely makes the foundation of their life bitterness or lust or greed. Nobody on purpose makes that the foundation of their life. But it happens all the time. Why? Because building on rock is hard. It's difficult. It requires intentionality. It's not easy. Forgiveness is hard. It's like building your house on a rock. Walking in purity is hard. It's like building a house on a rock. Submitting to other people is hard. It's like building your house on a rock. But if you do that, when the storm comes, you'll be able to stand. You will withstand what the storm brings. So here's what Jesus is saying. Sum it up. Everybody builds a house. Every house faces a storm. The storm will reveal the foundation that you have. And those who have built a foundation on putting God's word into practice, they're going to have a life that stands. They're going to have a life that survives. So, Jesus explains this principle from the outside, what it looks like from the outside. James tells us what this principle looks like from the inside. Here's what James says. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. What does he mean by that? What does he mean by hearers of the word wind up deceiving themselves if they don't put it into practice? Let's go back to the exercise equipment. Remember how healthy you felt when you bought that thing? You just felt like, man, I'm making progress. Some of you came to church this morning and think, hey, I'm in church this morning. I'm not asleep. I'm awake, and I'm even feeling convicted. I'm making progress. No, you're deceiving yourself. Here's what we need to understand. Believing but not doing deceives you into thinking you're making progress when you're not. And then he talks about a mirror in James. He gives an illustration of a mirror. He says, because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like someone looking at his own face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and immediately forgets what kind of person he was. So what James is saying is that somebody who just comes and hears the word of God but doesn't put it into practice is like somebody who comes and looks in the mirror and they see, boy, that's a mess in the mirror, but they just walk away and don't do anything with it. Now, who would do that? Who would look in a mirror and see, boy, things are a mess and just walk away? A seventh grade boy would do that. I had boys that went through seventh grade. Dad, I'm over at Eric's. He asked me to spend the night tonight. Can I spend the night over at Eric's house? Yeah, you sure can, but you're going to need to come home first. Why? What are you going to sleep in? What I have on. What are you going to wear tomorrow? What I have on. They could look in the mirror and see a mess and just keep going. But when you get older, things change. And some of you ladies, you have whole bags full of stuff to help fix what you look at in the mirror in the morning. And I can tell you how long that I'm trying not to get in trouble here. I will tell you how long you spend in the mirror until things look better. Because what we need to understand is that the mirror requires a response. You look in a mirror and get convicted about what you see, it requires that you do something because nobody gets credit just for looking in the mirror. You get up and you just roll out of bed and you just head on to work. You don't do anything. You get to work and your boss says, well, you're not meeting with any clients today, not looking like that. But I looked in the mirror. Yeah, but you don't get credit for looking in the mirror. You get credit for doing something about what you see in the mirror. See, what we wouldn't do physically, we do spiritually all the time. Here's the thing. We know what God expects of us and what he wants to do in us, but we change nothing. And some of you have been dealing with the same habits, the same junk, the same indulgences for years. And you go, oh yeah, I know, I need to do something about that. But it's not what you intend to do. It's not what you feel convicted about doing. It's what you actually do that matters. Obedience is everything. Here's what we read next in James. But the one who looks intently into the perfect law of freedom and perseveres in it and is not forgetful here, but a doer who works, this person will be blessed in what he does. So, looks intently. In other words, somebody who comes along and it's not just a casual glance, they gaze at it. That's that looks intently. It's used when Peter looks inside the tomb at the resurrection of Jesus. He gazes, he takes everything in. Did I just pull up at your house, just sit there and just go do that? Wow. It's almost like he was expecting that. Didn't give me any warning though, did you? No, we'll just wait, let it run out, then we'll do something. All right. Looks intently. Some of you ladies, you have look intently mirrors. They're little mirrors, they got lights around them, and they magnify. You can see into every pore, right? You can look through your eye into your brain. I mean, they just, the way that they magnify stuff. But what he's saying is those who look intently, those who take it all in, look intently at what? He says, look intently into the perfect law. What's the law he's talking about? Love God and love others. You look in that law, and what happens? Whenever you look intently, in other words, you take it in, it makes a difference in your life, is what he's saying. He says this law, he calls it the law of freedom. It brings freedom. So here's what I want you to understand. Jesus makes us a promise. You act upon what you hear, you will have a house, you will have a life that stands. James makes us a promise. You act upon what you've heard, and you're going to experience freedom. And we go, what does that look like? Well, I'll give you a few examples. One, you're taught. If you grew up in church, you're taught to tithe. You make $1, you give 10 cents. Make $10, you give $1. That's pretty easy when you're little. When you get older, though, it's a little more difficult. But if you will practice God's instructions about money, about giving, recognizes that He owns it all, and giving and contentment, you will wind up, although it may not be easy, but you will wind up experience financial freedom in your life. But some of you are in debt, aren't you? That doesn't feel like freedom, does it? But here's what you said. Oh, I'm not making $1 anymore. I'm making thousands of dollars. And for me to tithe, ooh, boy, that seems restrictive. I think I'll just do with what I want to do with that money. And didn't lead to freedom. Led to bondage. Or how about this one? You hear some pastor you might have here may say something like this: sex is for married people. And you hear that now, you're 15 years old. And when you hear that at 15 years old, here's what you think. Yeah, that's fine if you're married. But when you're 15, it's like a prison sentence. But some of you have grown older and you experienced sexual freedom. That was your lifestyle when you were a teenager. And now you realize that didn't lead to freedom. That has led to bondage. We are seeing several generations that have just been destroyed sexually in their lives. But when you do things God's way, it makes a difference. I mean, right now, there's plenty of tests and surveys that they've done. And here's what they've discovered. That those who abstain from sex till they're married, their sexual satisfaction in marriage is off the charts. Better, 30 plus points better than any other thing that leads to sexual satisfaction. I mean, it's way up there. In other words, you do things God's way, you're not weird, you're wise. So you do what God says, you put that to practice in your life, it leads to freedom. Financial freedom, sexual freedom. Here's one, if those two don't ring a bell with you, this one will. We know where God says we're to forgive, just like He's forgiven us. And you've been hurt. And here's what you said. There's no way I'm going to forgive them. After what they did, I'll never forgive them. And some of you, you've known people. Maybe you live with somebody. They said that, and as a result, they just got anger and bitterness inside of them continually. They're in bondage to that. But some of you have known people who's been hurt, a big hurt, and yet they've been saying, okay, I'm forgiving them. I'm letting that go. And they experience a freedom, liberation. So, Jesus tells us what this principle looks like from the outside. James tells us what it looks like from the inside. And John, I couldn't figure out how to put this in, but John takes that principle and he writes it on 2x4 and he hits you square in the face with it. Don't know any other way to put it. Here's what John says. The one who says, I have come to know Him and yet doesn't keep His commandments, he is a liar. The truth is not in him. So a disobedient Christian is not another kind of Christian. He's just a liar. Because he's disobedient. The word there, he doesn't obey. See, here's the thing. A lot of people, they will hear the truth, they'll believe the truth, but they'll just obey when they want to. They'll forgive when they want to. They'll give when they want to. They'll serve when they want to. If it pleases them, then they might think about, doing things God's way. And when they only do these things when they want to, they're proving they don't want a Lord, they just want a consultant. But a real Christian, A real Christian will obey when he doesn't want to. He'll obey when it's not convenient. He'll obey when it doesn't make sense. And he'll obey even when it's costly. So John just takes this, he just lays it out. And by the way, we'll throw this in. This is a reason so many times you see people and you think, well, I know they made a decision when they were young. I know they were baptized. Yeah, they may have believed, but they never went to that next step of being obedient. Here's what reading conclusions. This. One, it's not enough to believe it privately. You have to behave it publicly. Believing doesn't make any difference. It's what you do with what you believe that makes a difference. How many times do you hear people say, but I believe. So what? So what you believe? Every drunk I've talked to believes in Jesus. People that haven't been in church in 40 years believe in Jesus. And the church is full of lukewarm, worldly people who believe in Jesus. So what that you believe in Jesus? You don't get any credit for just believing. You're not a Christian if you just believe. You're a Christian if you obey. The gospel presents Jesus as someone who's worthy of all glory. The gospel presents Jesus as someone who's worthy of our complete and immediate obedience. The gospel knows nothing of praying a prayer and your life looking just the same after you prayed a prayer as it did before you prayed a prayer and calling that being a Christian. It's obedience that makes a difference. That's why John says that if you're a disobedient Christian, you're just a liar. Don't call yourself a Christian and just obey when you want to, when it pleases you, when it suits you. The next thing, the parable. I'm talking about the parable that Jesus told. Wise man builds his house on a rock. That parable will either be a comfort to you, a warning, or an explanation. See, it'll be a comfort to some of you because you have organized your life around Jesus' teachings. The way you do marriage, the way you do parenting, the way you work, the way you do relationships, it's all been organized around the teachings of Jesus. And if you have done that, what Jesus says is you are laying a foundation that will serve you for the rest of your life. And when the storm comes, and they will come, you're going to come through that storm and you're going to be left standing. In other words, your faith is going to be intact. Everything that poured about who you are, your soul, all that is going to remain standing. In fact, it might even be stronger. So for some people, it's a comfort. For other people, it's a warning. Because they said, I'll believe that stuff and I may agree with it, but it just doesn't fit my lifestyle. So I'll just do those things when I want to do those things. And I'm doing okay. After all, nothing but blue skies in front of me right now. But Jesus will say your time frame is too short. A storm is coming. And you're not going to do so well when it gets here. So for some people, it's a warning. For other people, it's an explanation. Because right now, you're in the middle of a storm. And things aren't going well. And you're saying, God, I thought you loved me. I thought you cared. I thought you wouldn't let bad things happen to me. After all, I'm a good person. But Jesus would say, yeah, but you really haven't been building on a good foundation. It's not a time of condemnation. It's an explanation. This is why your life is where it's at and why that you're experiencing a storm right now and you're just confused and dazed and don't know what to do. The third thing, you can't pray your way out of an issue that you behaved your way into. In other words, there's no magic prayer, there's no magic bullet. You have to follow your way out of this. And this is what I want you to hear. I want you to hear, have a relationship with Jesus. Because it's in that relationship with Jesus that you follow him into obedience in your life. You follow him in obedience in your marriage, in your relationships, in your finances, in your giving, in your attitudes. It all is centered around following him out in that relationship. So here's what I want you to hear this morning. Revival never happens when people discover a new truth they have never heard before. But God pours his Spirit out on people when they, all of a sudden, they realize that a truth that they have neglected, a truth that they have forgotten about, when they find that truth and they dig it out of that dirt and they lift it up and they clean it up and then they take and they orientate their life around that truth. Isn't that what we need? Especially with this truth, that hearing and believing is not enough. We have to obey. We have to do something about it. That's when revival happens. So we know exactly what we need to do. We just need the courage and the wisdom to do something with it. See, you're smart folks. I asked you to come down front and pray. And, well, you just get up, you come down front and pray. I thought, okay. See, they're smart. And you know exactly what you need to do. God's convicted you over it, over and over and over again. You know exactly what you need to do. You just need the courage and the wisdom to go ahead and do that. To take that truth out, that it's not what we hear, it's not what we believe, it's what we do that makes a difference. And we stop deceiving ourselves. It's kind of like paint. You know, paint in a bucket doesn't do any good. The value of paint's in the application. It's in what you do with it, putting it on the wall. And this may be the time where you say, okay, I'm going to take that and I'm fixing to apply it to my life. For some of you, what does that mean? It may mean you forgive. You know you need to forgive that person for years. And you said it maybe, but you know it really wasn't meant. It really wasn't real. But now's the time you make it real. Maybe it's time you give. Maybe it's the time, I don't know, you come and you become a part of a church. Maybe it's be baptized. Maybe it's get rid of greed in your life. Things you've known. You've heard, you've known, you believed. You feel convicted even. But you never have done anything with it. It's time we as a people, we take that truth that's been there for years, that we were raised with. Except for, you sang that song, wise man built his house on the rock. You sang it when you were kids. You've known that truth, but it's been sort of buried in your life. Now it's time to take that out and hold it up and begin to organize your life around that. Are you willing to do that? Well, it's not pretty if you don't. Some of you may be experiencing the not pretty part of that. Because you're setting yourself up for a failure or you're going through one or the other. And I deal with that a lot. People that life has come and a storm has just sort of spiritually wiped them out. But you know what? One of the greatest joys I have is watching people go through a storm and their life, their faith just seems to be so steady and almost grow. And it's like a light. It's like, wow, I want some of that. I want that. And all they've done is they've taken the time to build on a foundation, not of hearing, not of believing, not of remembering, not of agreeing with, but a foundation of doing. It's hard, but boy, is it worth it. And right now you have an opportunity to begin that, to take that step. Maybe coming down saying, Pastor, I want to commit my life to Christ. And maybe just come down here and kneeling and praying, but it's saying, I'm making the commitment right now. I'm not going to be just a believer and just a hearer. I'm going to be a doer. I'm going to start right now. I'm coming down to God and saying, God, no more. I know what you want me to do, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to start walking in purity. I'm going to get rid of the greed in my life. I'm going to do what you live finances out your way with honoring you and with contentment in my life. And I'm going to forgive that person that hurt me so bad and not live and let that anger just seethe inside of me. So what is it? What's that place? We're going to have a hymn of invitation. And I pray that if God is convicting your heart, that you don't just do any Christian mooing, okay? Now, you can move because you know you're going to do something with it. That's fine. You can move because, yeah, I'm ready, Lord. I'm ready to do something. He says, God, I've got to do that. But I just pray that as the Holy Spirit's dealing with you, you won't just say, oh, I felt convicted. I felt so close to God. But you'll be ready to do something about it. Let's stand together.